What's going on, everyone? It's your boy back with another video. Tonight, I've got 3 absolutely chilling stories from medical students working the night shift. These are real accounts that were sent to me, and I have to warn you, these stories will make you think twice about hospitals after dark. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into tonight's horrifying tales. Story 1. The Phantom Patient. This first story comes from Sarah, a third-year medical student who was doing her rotation at a large teaching hospital in Chicago. Sarah had always been fascinated by medicine, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened during one particular night shift in the emergency department. It was around 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday when Sarah was assigned to shadow Dr. Martinez, one of the senior residents. The emergency room was surprisingly quiet for a Tuesday night, just a few minor cases and the usual homeless individuals seeking shelter from the cold October weather. "You know," Dr. Martinez told Sarah as they sat at the nurse's station, "nights like these make me nervous. It's like the calm before the storm." Sarah nodded, reviewing patient charts on her tablet. She had learned to appreciate these quiet moments during her rotation. The emergency room could go from dead silent to absolute chaos in a matter of seconds. That's when the automatic doors burst open with a loud whoosh. A middle-aged man stumbled in, clutching his chest and gasping for air. His face was pale, almost gray, and sweat was pouring down his forehead despite the cool temperature outside. "Help me," he wheezed, his voice barely audible. I can't breathe." Dr. Martinez immediately jumped into action. "Get me a wheelchair," he called to Sarah. "Sir, what's your name? How long have you been experiencing chest pain?" The man collapsed into the wheelchair that Sarah quickly brought over. Thomas Mitchell," he gasped. "Started about 20 minutes ago. Feels like someone's sitting on my chest." They rushed Thomas into examination room 3. Sarah watched as Dr. Martinez began his assessment, checking vitals, listening to his heart, asking rapid-fire questions about his medical history. Everything seemed routine, textbook even. The man's symptoms were classic signs of a possible heart attack. "Sarah, call cardiology," Dr. Martinez instructed. "Tell them we might have an MI coming up." As Sarah reached for the phone, she noticed something odd. The patient monitor wasn't picking up any vital signs. The screen showed flat lines across the board, no heart rate, no blood pressure, no oxygen saturation. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah called out, "the monitor isn't reading anything." "Must be a malfunction," he replied without looking up from his examination. "These old machines act up all the time. Just check his pulse manually." Sarah approached the bed and reached for Thomas's wrist. The moment her fingers touched his skin, an icy chill shot through her entire body. His skin was cold, not just cool, but genuinely cold, like he'd been outside in freezing weather for hours. But that wasn't the strangest part. She couldn't feel a pulse. Nothing. She moved her fingers around his wrist, pressing harder, trying different positions. Still nothing. "Dr. Martinez," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "I can't find a pulse." "What?" Dr. Martinez turned around, finally giving her his full attention. "That's impossible. He was just talking to us." He moved to the other side of the bed and checked for a pulse at Thomas's neck. His face immediately went pale. That's not possible," he muttered. Sarah looked down at Thomas. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, but there was something wrong with them. They looked cloudy, unfocused, like... "Dr. Martinez," Sarah's voice was barely a whisper now. "Look at his eyes." Dr. Martinez leaned over the patient and immediately stepped back. "What the hell?" Thomas's eyes had the distinctive cloudy appearance of someone who had been dead for hours. But somehow, impossibly, his mouth began to move. "The pain," Thomas whispered, his voice now sounding distant and hollow. "The pain never stops. It just keeps getting worse." Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest. Every instinct was telling her to run, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. She watched in horror as Thomas slowly turned his head to look directly at her. "You're going to be a doctor," he said, his cloudy eyes somehow focusing on hers. "But you'll never save them all. Some of us, we're already gone." The room suddenly felt freezing cold. Sarah could see her breath forming small clouds in the air. The fluorescent lights above began to flicker, casting eerie shadows across the walls. "Sarah, we need to get out of here." Dr. Martinez grabbed her arm. "No." But as they turned toward the door, they found it wouldn't open. Dr. Martinez pulled on the handle, pressed the automatic opener. Nothing worked. They were trapped in the room with whatever Thomas had become. "The morgue," Thomas continued, his voice getting stronger but somehow more terrifying. "Basement level. That's where I should be. But the pain brought me back." Sarah noticed that the temperature in the room was continuing to drop. Ice was actually beginning to form on the windows. Her breath was now visible with every exhale. "Thomas," Dr. Martinez tried to maintain his professional composure, though Sarah could hear the fear in his voice. "What happened to you? How did you get here?" Thomas sat up in the bed, something that should have been impossible given his condition. "Heart attack," he said simply. 3 hours ago. In the parking lot outside. Security found me. But by then..." He gestured to his body. "By then it was too late. They brought me straight to the morgue. But the pain, it wouldn't let me rest." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She couldn't tell if it was from fear or from the intense cold that was now making it difficult to breathe. "Please," she whispered. "What do you want from us?" Thomas smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who knew something terrible that others didn't. "I want you to remember," he said. "When you become doctors, you'll lose patients. It's inevitable. But some of us, we don't go quietly. Some of us come back to remind you that death isn't always the end of suffering." The lights in the room suddenly went out completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. Sarah heard Dr. Martinez's sharp intake of breath beside her. The only sound was the steady beeping of machines from somewhere far away in the hospital. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything returned to normal. The lights flickered back on, the temperature returned to normal, and the door clicked open. But the bed was empty. Thomas was gone. Sarah and Dr. Martinez stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, Dr. Martinez broke the silence. "We need to check with security," he said, his voice still shaky. "Find out if anyone matching that description was brought in tonight." They made their way to the security office, where Officer Jenkins was monitoring the cameras. "Evening. Document. Everything all right? You both look like you've seen a ghost. Can you check your logs for tonight?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Looking for a Thomas Mitchell, middle-aged male, possible cardiac event." Officer Jenkins typed on his computer for a few minutes, then frowned. "That's odd," he said. "We did have a Thomas Mitchell tonight. Found him in the parking lot around 11:30 p.m. Cardiac arrest. But Doc..." He looked up at them with a puzzled expression. "He was DOA. Been in the morgue for 3 hours now." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Dr. Martinez, who had gone completely pale. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Officer Jenkins nodded. "Positive. I was the one who found him. Poor guy was already gone when the paramedics arrived." "Why? Did someone claim to be him?" Sarah and Dr. Martinez exchanged glances. They both knew that what they had experienced was impossible to explain. Who would believe them? To this day, Sarah refuses to work night shifts alone. She says that sometimes, late at night in the hospital, she can still feel that intense cold creeping into rooms. And she swears that occasionally, she catches glimpses of Thomas in her peripheral vision, still clutching his chest, still searching for relief from pain that death couldn't cure. Story 2. The Surgical Observation. This second story was sent to me by Marcus, a fourth-year medical student who was completing his surgical rotation at a prestigious medical center on the East Coast. Marcus had always dreamed of becoming a surgeon, and he was thrilled when he was selected to observe a late-night emergency surgery. The case involved a young woman named Jennifer who had been in a severe car accident. She had multiple internal injuries and needed immediate surgery to save her life. Dr. Catherine Webb, one of the hospital's most respected surgeons, would be performing the operation. "This is going to be a long night," Dr. Webb told Marcus as they scrubbed in. "Are you ready for this? It's not going to be pretty." Marcus nodded eagerly. "I've been preparing for this my whole life, Dr. Webb." Thank you for letting me observe. The surgery was scheduled to begin at 11 p.m. As they entered the operating room, Marcus was struck by how quiet and sterile everything felt. The patient was already under anesthesia, covered in surgical drapes, with only the area of operation visible. The surgical team consisted of Dr. Webb, an anesthesiologist named Dr. Patel, 2 surgical nurses, and Marcus observing from a corner of the room. Everything seemed routine and professional. "Scalpel," Dr. Webb requested, beginning the initial incision. For the first hour, the surgery proceeded normally. Marcus watched in fascination as Dr. Webb worked with incredible precision, repairing damaged organs and stopping internal bleeding. This was everything he had hoped surgery would be: skilled, methodical, life-saving work. But around midnight, things started to feel different. "Marcus," Dr. Webb said without looking up from her work, "come closer. You need to see this." Marcus moved closer to the operating table. As he approached, he noticed something odd about the patient. Despite being under deep anesthesia, Jennifer's eyes were open. Not just open, they were darting around the room, clearly conscious and aware. "Dr. Webb," Marcus whispered, "is she supposed to be awake?" "Awake?" Dr. Webb looked up at him with a confused expression. "What do you mean, awake? She's been under anesthesia for over an hour." Marcus looked back at the patient. Jennifer's eyes were now fixed directly on him, and he could see tears streaming down her face. Her mouth was moving, trying to form words, but no sound was coming out due to the breathing tube. "Can she feel this?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with horror. Dr. Patel, the anesthesiologist, checked his monitors. "All her vitals indicate she's completely unconscious," he said. "There's no way she can feel anything." But Marcus could see the terror in Jennifer's eyes. She was aware of everything that was happening to her, and she was in agony. "We need to give her more anesthesia," Marcus insisted. "She's conscious." "Marcus," Dr. Webb's voice was sharp now, "I need you to focus. Sometimes students get overwhelmed by their first major surgery. Take a deep breath." Marcus looked around the room. The surgical team was continuing their work as if nothing was wrong. But Jennifer's eyes were now filled with such pain and fear that Marcus felt sick to his stomach. That's when he noticed something else that made his blood run cold. The clock on the wall read 12:15 a.m., but he was certain that only a few minutes had passed since he last checked. How had 15 minutes gone by so quickly? "How long have we been operating?" Marcus asked. "About 3 hours now," Dr. Webb replied without looking up. 3 hours. Marcus stared at the clock again. That was impossible. He had only been in the room for just over an hour. He looked back at Jennifer, and what he saw made him stumble backward. Her eyes were no longer just conscious, they were pleading with him. And somehow, impossibly, he could hear her voice in his head. "Help me," her voice whispered in his mind. "Please, make them stop. I can feel everything." Marcus felt dizzy. The room seemed to be spinning slightly, and the bright surgical lights were becoming almost blindingly intense. "I need some air," he announced to the room. "You can't leave now," Dr. Webb said firmly. "We're at a critical point in the procedure." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was focused on Jennifer's face, and what he saw there made him want to scream. Her eyes were now completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye. And her skin was starting to look gray, almost decomposed. "Dr. Webb," Marcus's voice was shaking now. "Something's wrong with the patient." The entire surgical team stopped what they were doing and looked at him. Their faces were expressionless, almost blank. "What's wrong, Marcus?" Dr. Webb asked, but her voice sounded different now. Hollow and echoing, as if she was speaking from far away. Marcus looked back at Jennifer. Her eyes were normal again, but she was still clearly conscious and in pain. The tears on her face had turned red. She was crying blood. "She's awake," Marcus shouted. "Can't you see she's awake?" That's when Dr. Webb began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, but quickly grew into a loud, maniacal laughter that echoed off the walls of the operating room. The other surgical team members joined in, their laughter filling the room with a horrible, hollow sound. "Of course she's awake," Dr. Webb said, her voice now sounding distorted and unnatural. They're always awake, Marcus. They feel everything. That's the point. Marcus felt his heart racing. He looked around the room and realized that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire situation. The walls of the operating room seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting slowly. The surgical instruments on the nearby table were covered in what looked like rust or dried blood. "This isn't real," Marcus whispered to himself. "This can't be real." "Oh, but it is real," Dr. Webb continued, her laughter subsiding into a sinister smile. "This is what surgery really is, Marcus. We cut into people while they're conscious and aware. We cause them unimaginable pain. And we tell ourselves it's for their own good." Marcus looked back at Jennifer one more time. Her eyes were now completely white, rolled back in her head, but somehow she was still looking at him. "Run," her voice echoed in his mind. "Get out of here before they make you one of us." Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He ran toward the door, but as he reached for the handle, the room suddenly went completely dark. He could hear the laughter of the surgical team echoing around him, getting louder and more distorted. When the lights came back on, Marcus found himself standing in an empty operating room. There was no surgical team, no patient, no equipment. Just him, standing alone in a sterile, empty room. He checked his watch. It was 11 p.m., the exact time the surgery was supposed to begin. Marcus ran out of the operating room and straight to the front desk. "Excuse me," he said to the night nurse. "What happened to the emergency surgery?" "The car accident victim." The nurse looked at him with confusion. "What surgery? We haven't had any emergency surgeries tonight. It's been completely quiet." Marcus felt his legs give out from under him. He slumped into a nearby chair, trying to process what had just happened. "Are you all right, dear?" the nurse asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus never did find out if Jennifer was real or if the surgery ever took place. But to this day, whenever he's in an operating room, he makes sure to look into the patient's eyes. Because sometimes, late at night, he swears he can still see Jennifer looking back at him, tears of blood streaming down her face, silently begging for help that he was never able to give. Story 3. The Morgue Assignment. This final story comes from David, a second-year medical student who was completing his pathology rotation at a large urban hospital. Part of his training involved spending time in the hospital morgue, learning about autopsies and cause-of-death determinations. David had always been uncomfortable with death, but he knew that understanding it was crucial to his future as a physician. So when Dr. Harrison, the chief pathologist, assigned him to a night shift in the morgue, David reluctantly agreed. "Don't worry," Dr. Harrison told him. "It's usually quiet down there at night. You'll mostly be organizing files and preparing for tomorrow's autopsies. Think of it as a peaceful study environment." The morgue was located in the basement of the hospital, accessible only by a service elevator that required a special key card. As David descended into the basement, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving the world of the living behind. The morgue itself was exactly what you'd expect: sterile, cold, and filled with a distinctive smell of formaldehyde and disinfectant. Rows of refrigerated drawers lined the walls, each one potentially containing a body awaiting autopsy. David's assignment was simple: review the files for the next day's scheduled autopsies and ensure that all the necessary paperwork was in order. He settled in at a desk in the corner of the room and began working through the stack of files. The first few hours passed uneventfully. David reviewed cases involving natural deaths, accidental deaths, and a few suspicious circumstances that would require more detailed examination. It was clinical, methodical work that helped him push aside his discomfort with being surrounded by death. Around 2 a.m., David decided to take a break. He stood up to stretch his legs and grab a coffee from the vending machine down the hall. As he walked past the wall of refrigerated drawers, he noticed that one of them was slightly ajar. That was odd. The drawers were supposed to be kept sealed at all times to maintain proper temperature and prevent contamination. David approached the drawer to close it properly. As he reached for the handle, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a quiet tapping noise, like someone gently knocking on the inside of the drawer. Asterisk tap. 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 Asterisk. David froze. He told himself it was just the cooling system making noise, or maybe the building settling. But the tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. Asterisk tap. 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 Asterisk. Against his better judgment, David pulled the drawer open. Inside was the body of an elderly woman, probably in her 70s. According to the tag attached to her toe, her name was Margaret Sullivan, and she had died of natural causes earlier that day. She looked peaceful, her eyes closed, her hands folded across her chest. But as David stared at her, he could have sworn he saw her chest rise and fall slightly, as if she was breathing. "That's impossible," David whispered to himself. "She's been dead for 12 hours. He leaned closer to get a better look. That's when Margaret's eyes snapped open. David stumbled backward, his heart pounding. Margaret's eyes were cloudy and unfocused, but they were definitely open, and they seemed to be looking directly at him. "Cold," she whispered, her voice barely audible but unmistakably real. So cold. David's rational mind was screaming that this was impossible. Dead people don't talk. Dead people don't open their eyes. But the evidence was right in front of him. "Ma'am," David said, his voice shaking, You're supposed to be dead." Margaret finished his sentence. She slowly turned her head to look at him more directly. "I am dead, young man. But death isn't what you think it is." David felt like he was going to be sick. Every instinct was telling him to run, but he couldn't seem to move his feet. "What do you mean?" he whispered. Margaret smiled, but it was a sad, hollow expression. "Death isn't the end of consciousness, dear. It's just the end of the body. But the mind can linger for a while." As she spoke, David noticed that the temperature in the room was dropping rapidly. His breath was becoming visible in the cold air. "How long?" David asked, though he wasn't sure why he was continuing this conversation. "Depends on the person," Margaret replied. "Some fade quickly. Others, like me, we stay aware for days, sometimes weeks. Trapped in these broken bodies, fully conscious but unable to move, unable to scream." David looked around the room at all the refrigerated drawers. "Are they all conscious?" "Some of them. The recent ones, mostly. We can hear everything that happens around us. Every conversation, every procedure, every moment of your living lives continuing while we're trapped in this cold, dark prison." The tapping sound started again, but now it was coming from multiple drawers. David realized with growing horror that other bodies were trying to get his attention. "Please," Margaret continued, "tell the doctors. Tell them we're still here. Some of us are in so much pain, but we can't make them understand." More drawers began to open on their own. David watched in terror as pale hands began to emerge from several of them. The tapping was getting louder, more insistent. "They perform autopsies on us," Margaret said, tears now streaming down her face. "They cut us open while we're still aware. We feel every incision, every probe, every examination. But we can't scream, we can't move, we can't make them stop." David backed toward the door, but found that it had somehow locked behind him. The keycard reader was flashing red, denying him access. "Don't leave us," Margaret pleaded. "Please, you have to tell them. You have to make them understand that death isn't the end of suffering." More bodies were sitting up in their drawers now. David could see men, women, even children, all with the same cloudy eyes and pale, gray skin. They were all looking at him with expressions of desperate hope. "I will," David promised, though he had no idea how he could possibly explain this to anyone. "I'll tell them." Margaret smiled again, this time with genuine gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. One by one, the bodies lay back down in their drawers. The drawers closed by themselves, and the room returned to its normal temperature. The keycard reader flashed green, and David heard the door unlock behind him. He ran from the morgue and didn't stop until he reached the main floor of the hospital. He immediately went to find Dr. Harrison, but when he tried to explain what had happened, the words sounded insane even to his own ears. "David," Dr. Harrison said gently, "I think you might be experiencing some stress from your first extended time in the morgue. It's normal for students to have some psychological reactions to being around death." But David knew what he had experienced was real. He insisted on checking the morgue records for Margaret Sullivan. According to the files, Margaret had died of a heart attack at 3:15 p.m. the previous day. But when they checked her drawer, her body showed signs of recent movement, her hair was disheveled, and her hands were positioned differently than they had been during the initial storage. David never completed his pathology rotation. He switched to pediatrics, refusing to work anywhere near the morgue. But sometimes, late at night when he's working in the hospital, he swears he can hear faint tapping sounds coming from the floors below. And he's never been able to forget Margaret's words, "Death isn't the end of consciousness, it's just the end of the body." So there you have it, 3 absolutely terrifying stories from medical students working the night shift. Each one reminds us that hospitals, places we associate with healing and hope, can also be home to things we can't quite explain. Sarah's encounter with a phantom patient who couldn't find peace even in death. Marcus's nightmarish surgical observation where the line between reality and horror became completely blurred. And David's discovery that death might not be the peaceful end we all hope for. These stories were all sent to me by real medical students, and I have to say, they've made me think twice about what really goes on in hospitals after dark. Which story scared you the most? Was it the ghostly patient seeking relief from eternal pain? The surgical nightmare where the patient was awake for everything? Or the morgue revelation that consciousness might persist long after the body dies? Comment below and let me know which one gave you the most chills. And if you're a medical student or healthcare worker with your own terrifying night shift story, send it my way. I'm always looking for more true horror stories to share. Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling content, and I'll see you in the next one. Sleep tight, and try not to think about what might be happening in your local hospital right now, in the dead of night.